welcome to the GT350 Garage. My name's Walter, and in this video we are going to curve a distributor. So you probably already have a stock distributor, and you might be thinking you need to upgrade it. Or maybe you've already upgraded it with something like a drop-in Pertronics module, but you're still using the stock curve. There's always room for improvement in your timing curve, especially with the changes that have happened in modern gas. And because of the differences in fuel, changing the curve or the advance rate of the mechanical advance in your distributor can result in a better running engine, better fuel economy, and more performance. Now, in this particular case, this is the dual point distributor that came out of my 289 Hypo. I actually have a couple of these. And this is the Duraspark distributor that I'm going to be running in the engine when it goes back in. This is actually a rather special distributor. This particular unit is specifically for a 1985 Mustang GT 5-liter with a manual transmission, and this distributor, which has a tag number on it of E5ZE12127BA, was the only distributor to come with a steel gear for a hydraulic roller camshaft. So these distributors are actually kind of desirable. You can order a lot of distributors now with the steel gear on them. If you don't have the steel gear and you want to order a factory style unit, or you want to go out and hunt around in the wrecking yards, these do exist out in the wild, and every once in a while they pop up. They're great distributors. I have the best luck with the factory Duraspark 2 distributors. They're just super reliable and they're super predictable. So with that, about 80% of you guys that are watching my videos are still not subscribers. If you like this content, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, give a thumbs up if you like the video itself, share the video, it helps the channel. And if you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments section below. Reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, or through email. I'm happy to answer your questions. And let's get started with curving a distributor. All right, let's get started with a basic comparison. First things first, here on your right, we have a factory dual point distributor from my 66 Shelby. And if you notice, this distributor has no vacuum advance. On your left, this is a Duraspark 2 magnetic trigger distributor, so it has the big Duraspark plug on it. It is also a vacuum advance. And one of the more obvious things that you're going to notice between the two of these is the difference in the style of cap. These caps are interchangeable, and that's actually something that's a bit of a point of contention with some guys. Some guys seem to think that you cannot use a Duraspark cap with a Monte Carlo bar on an early Mustang. I beg to differ. The distributor cap, the highest point of this cap is the coil post. It's the only thing that would hit the Monte Carlo bar, and the difference in height between these terminals on the Duraspark and these terminals on our socket style cap is only about a ½ an inch. I happen to have an old coil wire here that is both socket style and the HEI Duraspark style. Now if we measure the height difference, we have just shy of 4 inch, and we have just shy of 3.5 inch. So this ½ inch difference is not enough to put you into the Monte Carlo bar on most applications. And that's something that if you were concerned you can't run this style cap and you want to run this style cap, you can do it if you're using a factory Duraspark distributor. Now, the same does not fall true if you're using an aftermarket distributor like a ProBillet MSD, which is actually quite a bit taller. With their cap adapter and their taller base, it's quite a bit taller, and it will not fit under the straight Monte Carlo bar. So let's get started on the disassembly here, and to do that, we're going to take the caps off and do a quick little comparison. So there's that cap, and here's this cap. So you can see that the rotor on the Duraspark is flush with the cap adapter, and it sticks up quite a bit above the main body of the point style distributor. So our early points distributors clearly look a little bit different. Now, when we get to the actual rotors, you can see that there's a big difference in the size of the rotor and also in the tip of the rotor. Let me hold those up to the camera a little bit closer so that you can see side by side just how big the difference is. And where the Duraspark distributor rotor has an advantage is if you have a bit of a rotor phasing issue because of the timing that you're running, the wider terminal on this Duraspark rotor solves the rotor phasing issue just a little bit. Now, this is where it gets fun. If you take this adapter off of the Duraspark distributor, you can then put it on the points distributor. It snaps right on. And then you can put your Duraspark rotor right into your points distributor, and you can convert a points distributor over to a Duraspark rotor that easily. It's very, very simple. And that lets you run the larger cap, which is good for high energy ignitions, prevents crossfire, helps with rotor phasing, and lets you run a slightly more modern wire set. Inside our points distributor, we have a condenser, and we have two sets of points. And it's important to note that on a dual point factory style setup, these use 6-cylinder points, not V8 points. So when you go into the parts store, if you're running dual points, ask for 2 sets of 6-cylinder points. The purpose of the points is to break the connection to ground, and that's why they're called breaker point ignitions. The purpose of having dual points instead of single points is to increase the dwell time. These points are staggered slightly, so the circuit is broken slightly longer than on a single point system. And it was easier to install 2 sets of points on the same distributor cam than it was to change the profile of the cam for a single point system. It also improved reliability at high speed. Our magnetic trigger assembly, we have the reluctor here in the center. We have our magnetic pickup. This distributor, you can see the vacuum advance mechanism is connected to the plate on this rotating base that allows the mechanism to move when you apply vacuum. We've got an adjustable vacuum advance on here. The mechanism, as we're going to get to it, is easily adjustable, but it's a little bit intimidating to try and take one of these apart. So I'm going to show you how to take both styles of distributor apart as part of the recurving process. The first thing we're going to start with, and this is going to be important because normally you won't be starting with a dual point distributor. The first thing we're going to start with is taking the vacuum advance mechanism off. And if you look right here, you can see that there's a small clip. You just stick your screwdriver in the clip, pull it back, and I recommend a screwdriver with a magnet on it Stick that magnet in there, grab that clip, set the clip aside where you won't lose it. Then it's just a matter of taking this vacuum advance mechanism off, and that's just the 2 screws here. Set your screws aside, and the vacuum advance comes out that easy. I'm going to show you how easy it is once the vacuum advance is out of the way to get to the advance mechanism on a points distributor. You have 2 screws. You have a screw here, and you have a screw over here. And having a screwdriver with a little magnet on the end just makes the whole process go super easy. Now you'll need to work the lead for the points through. So take your little screwdriver and work that lead through the hole in the distributor. With that wire out of there, you can grab this point plate by the condenser and the wiring, and it just lifts off. At this point, you can see the internal mechanism in the distributor. You have 2 weights, you have 2 springs, you have a limiter right here, and then you have an open space that has no limiter in it. So the limiter, as you look at this, you have this 13L marked here. And on the other side, we'll turn it, you can see that it's an 18L. I'm going to explain more about that in just a second once we get the Duraspark distributor apart. Okay, so obviously the first step on a Duraspark distributor is the same as on a points distributor. You're going to want to remove the vacuum advance. Now, once the vacuum advance is out of the way, you need to remove the reluctor. And I want to point out to you that holding this reluctor in place is a roll pin, and you can see it at the tip of my screwdriver here. That roll pin is just pressed in with a drift. I'll show the installation. This tool is a battery terminal remover. It's basically a small puller, and you hook the battery terminal, and then when you turn this center screw, this presses against the battery post, and it pulls the battery terminal that's stuck on the post off of the battery post. Great tool. Well, it happens to work fantastic for taking the reluctor off of a Duraspark distributor. So I recommend find something like this. So what you're going to want to do is back this off just a little bit so that you can get it underneath the reluctor. And once you get it underneath the reluctor, let's see, you can see that I've got it under the reluctor there. Center it up on the shaft, tighten the center. I'm going to need both hands to do this. Tighten it up so that it's grabbed a hold of the reluctor, and then you're just simply going to turn this. As you turn it, it just simply slides the reluctor on the shaft. Let's finish this. This particular tool runs out of room right at the same time we get to the top. Now, the roll pin just happens to be sitting on the top of the shaft. Grab that with your magnet. Set it with the C-clip that you took off of the vacuum advance mechanism. So now you have your reluctor There's no damage to your reluctor. You don't have to worry about it. The reluctor just drops on. Without that roll pin on there, you can put it on and you can take it right off. It is not a press fit. Only the roll pin holds it in place, but you can't remove the roll pin without pressing this off. So the next step is to remove the magnetic trigger plate, and you'll need to remove the screws just like you did on the points plate. Set those aside. Now the first one, it's important to note, the first one holds down your wiring. So go ahead and pull that one out of the way. You can see that there's only 2 wires inside the distributor, but there's 3 wires outside the distributor. So on a Duraspark ignition, this ground is important for the Duraspark distributor. If you're using any kind of an aftermarket ignition box to trigger it, you're only relying on the magnetic trigger, and as a result, you don't need that ground, and you can actually do away with this plug. As you rotate this around, it exposes the second screw. Take your second screw out. Set it aside, and the plate comes off. With the stock advance mechanism in this 85 Mustang GT distributor, you have this yellow spring here, and this spring is actually just barely taut. If I hold the bottom shaft, you can see that it pulls it back to the limiter every time. And then you have this heavier spring that's a little bit loose. And a lot of people don't understand why this is loose, and their instinct is to tighten it up. If you do that, when you tighten this big spring up, you just slowed down your advance mechanism off idle to a crawl, and it will take forever to get your timing to advance. Now, going back to the numbers, here we have a 10L, and if we turn it 180 degrees, we have a 15L. What are these markings? If you're not familiar with these 4 distributors, these markings represent how many distributor degrees of advance. So that means 10 or 15 degrees in this distributor, or in this distributor, 13 or 18 degrees. Now we have to multiply that by 2 to get crankshaft degrees. So this is 20 or 30 crankshaft degrees, and our dual point has either 26 or 36 degrees of advance in the mechanism. Obviously, we're on the 26 here, because back when these cars were originally set up, they would run 34 to 36 degrees of total timing. That was on old gas that burned slow. You needed that timing. There's a lot of arguments about people wanting to still continue to run that much timing. And I'm going to tell you that with modern fuel, you don't need to run that much timing. In fact, you need to run less timing because modern fuel burns a little bit more efficiently and it burns a little bit faster. Now, the key is if you're running the higher octane modern fuel, which is coincidentally pretty close to premium fuel from the 60s because of the change in the octane ratings, 20 degrees of advance from the advance mechanism is quite a bit. And if you add anywhere from 10 to 16 degrees of initial advance, you're going to have 30 to 36 degrees of total advance. That's a lot of timing. Now, on a dyno with race gas in controlled conditions, 36 degrees of timing might work just fine. But in practicality, on a street engine, 36 degrees of timing is too much. You're going to find that if you're running early stock cast iron 289 heads with the heart-shaped chambers and high compression, these engines today want the timing to be in the 28 to 32 degree range at most, depending on the compression ratio. At 9 to 1, they only want about 32 degrees, and when you get up to about 10.5, 11 1, 26 to 28 degrees is about all they can tolerate. But saying that that's tolerating it isn't exactly true. The key is you want to reach peak cylinder pressure about 10 to 15 degrees after top dead center. So in order to reach that pressure at that time, you have to start the fuel burning at the correct time. And that's why this discussion is important, and that's why what we're talking about here carries so much weight. So this 10L, this is a good starting point, but I'm going to be honest with you right now. I have another one of these mechanisms that I've already modified, and it's going to be for the high compression engine that's going in my Shelby, and I've modified it to be the equivalent of a 7L. So 14 degrees of advance is all my distributor will have in it. That's what the distributor will have in mechanical advance. The base timing on the engine is going to be about 14 degrees, which means my total timing will be about 28 degrees. I will still be running a vacuum advance, and that will help with idle quality, and that'll help with fuel economy and engine operating temperatures. All of these things work hand in hand. So the question then becomes, how do we get from a 10L or a 13L or an 18L, how do we get to the equivalent of a 7L? And that takes a little bit of measuring, and it takes a little bit more disassembly, and then it takes a little welding. So let me disassemble this just a bit further and show you. First thing is, in the center of the distributor, you're going to need a pick tool. In the center of the distributor, you have a felt, and that felt needs to come out. Take the felt out. That felt is designed to have a couple drops of oil put on it, and then that oil will gently seep down into the center of the distributor here, so that over time it keeps the mechanism lubricated. Look at the point of this, and you can see that there's a clip, and we've got two little legs sticking up on that clip. We have to get that clip out of there. To do that, a set of bent needle nose pliers, and you just kind of give it a little twist and a pull, and you can pop that clip out of there. It can be a lot harder than that, I assure you. Some of these can be real buggers, but if you've done as many of them as I have, they come out pretty easy. So now with that out of there, we need to take the springs off. And to get the springs off, just put your small flat blade screwdriver behind the spring, give it a little twist, and it pops right off. You can reach in and lift up, and it pops off. And then you can do the same thing with the heavy spring on the other side. Inside here, you should have a little bit of grease, and it should be a grease that won't dry out. Something that'll stay free moving long term. So same thing with this shaft, and you can see that there's this knurling on the shaft, and that's to keep the grease retained in here. And then obviously we have our weights, and then this is one of the most important parts of the advance mechanism. This little bushing, and that is exactly what it is. It's a bushing. If you lose that bushing, you will have too much friction, and your advance mechanism won't advance the way you want it to. So you got to be really careful with that. Don't lose it. And make sure it's got just a thin film of grease on it. So you have a 10L here. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to measure your 10L. And you want to measure it about halfway, like so. And that gives me a measurement of 4/10 of an inch. Okay? Now we'll measure our 15L. And our 15L, I get a measurement of about 525 thousandths. So we can take those two measurements, and we know that 5 degrees at this point, 5 degrees is about 0.125, or an eighth of an inch. So every eighth of an inch that we close this gap up, we're going to get rid of 5 degrees. The way I modify these is on this, it looks like a boot. On the toe side of this boot, just weld it up with a MIG welder until about half of this gap is gone. Reshape it. Okay, you have our measurement of 0.4 here. Our measurement is 0.525 here. So 125, our eighth of an inch. Say we want 7.5 degrees. We would take 62.5 thousandths out of 400. So we would grind this until the shape is about 3.375 wide. Okay, and at 3.37 wide, 3.375 wide, you're going to have about 7.5 degrees. Now that is dependent upon one other factor, and it's an important factor. If you look inside this distributor, you can see that there's a little plastic bushing on here, and you can see that I'm moving it around. If this plastic bushing goes missing, the width of this, where it hits the actual distributor limiter, is cut in half, and it will give you approximately 5 degrees of extra timing that you don't want. So if you don't have that little plastic bushing on there, you need to get one, and you need to put it back on. So once we've decided what our advance mechanism is going to be set up for and how many degrees of advance we want, we're going to put our advance mechanism back together. And that means sliding this guy back together, just like so. Now, this little clip can be harder to put in than it was to take out. You just kind of drop it into place, make sure that it's right side up. So that means the little legs are sticking up. Take your screwdriver and push down on one side, and take your pick tool, push down on the other side, and you can pop it into place. It sometimes takes a little doing. There we go. That's it. So that clip is back in place. Now we're going to take our felt, push the felt back down into place. And at this point, this is when you would put like 2 or 3 drops of lightweight oil on here, and that's just going to slowly seep down into the mechanism. And what I'm using for this job is a Mr. Gasket 925D spring kit. This spring kit has been available for decades. It provides a pretty fast advance curve, as in on most of these distributors, your timing's going to be all in by 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, depending on the weights in your distributor. These are very light advance springs. Now, 2000 RPM is too soon. So you have a couple of options. Here's the different springs. I'll hold them up so you can see them. This purple spring, this is a heavy spring, okay? And you don't want to use this purple spring. The yellow spring, which you can see doesn't have as many coils as the aftermarket spring, is still heavier than the aftermarket springs. And then we have the pair of aftermarket springs, okay? Notice that these springs are all basically the same length. Your options here are kind of diverse. If you want to hunt through a bunch of Ford distributors, you can pull a bunch of light distributors, and there's yellows, blues, reds, and silvers. Each one of them is a different rate. Don't ask me what the exact rate is on them. I don't have a chart. Generally, what I do is instead of using both of the springs out of the curve kit, I'll use one spring from the curve kit and the original light spring. So in this case, the yellow spring and the Mr. Gasket advanced curve spring. And that's what we're going to use today. The reason for that is it's going to provide full timing at around 27 to 2900 RPM. That's more in line with where we want it, and for the engine that I'm building for my car, my cruise RPM down the highway is going to be about 2600 RPM at 75 miles an hour. So I'm going to be in that 2700 RPM range. At that point, I want to be right into maximum advance, and that'll give me maximum available torque. I'll also have full vacuum advance at that point. So when I go into the throttle, I'm going to be on manifold vacuum on my vacuum advance, and that's going to result in this losing its vacuum signal, and with the loss of vacuum, this advance will go away. So basically what I'm doing is I'm utilizing this old distributor technology to mimic modern fuel injection. Okay, so this is an adjustable vacuum advance, and that means I can adjust how much advance I get from how much vacuum. Okay, basically I can have this thing advancing all the way down to about 3 inches of vacuum and all the way up to whatever the peak vacuum is for the engine. So when I let off the throttle, this is going to advance the timing, and it's going to make sure that the engine continues to run with maximum timing in its leanest conditions when it's under no load. When I'm cruising down the freeway in overdrive at 2700 RPM, I'm going to have fairly high vacuum in this engine, 14 to 16 inches, and this vacuum advance will be producing its maximum advance at that point. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up so that that vacuum goes away just below the engine's idle vacuum. So this engine with the camshaft that's in it, I expect it to idle at around 10 to 12 inches of vacuum. So I'll set this up so that anything below about 7 or 8 inches of vacuum, it doesn't produce any advance. That way, as soon as I tip into the throttle and the vacuum goes away on my manifold vacuum source, this vacuum disappears and I run on the mechanical advance curve, which is safe for the engine. I'll have tuned it to the engine's wants and needs. All right. So let's put some springs on. You want to put your lightest spring on your primary side. So in the case of this, we're going to put it on here. Hook it on the pin. Take okay, so you want to put your lightest spring on the primary side. So hook it on the advance mechanism pin, and boy, this one's being stubborn. hook it on the advanced mechanism pin, and then take your screwdriver and just simply flip it over. Now, if you look, you can see that there's a little bit of an air gap on this spring. You want a little bit of tension, but not a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our pliers and we're going to adjust so that we have minimal air gap. Now, I want you to notice that even doing that, we still pull right back, okay? So we still have tension on it, and it pulls right back onto the limiter, but we're not under much tension from the spring. So right off idle, this thing is going to start to advance off of that spring, and that's something that we want. I'll show you how we can adjust that without taking the distributor apart here in a minute. So then we'll put our secondary spring on, and again, hook it on the advanced mechanism pin. It's rough having big fingers sometimes. Okay, so we got it hooked on that pin. Take your screwdriver, pull it out. And get it over the top and hook it around. Now this spring, we don't want any tension on this spring to begin with. We do have tension as soon as we get into it. So to make this advanced mechanism work properly, we're going to bend this back, and we're going to take just a little bit of tension off of that spring. So that that spring isn't primarily acting any harder than it needs to be. So now both of our springs are set up, and that's how I curve these. Okay, let's say you don't have access to light springs other than a Mr. Gasket curve kit. For whatever reason, your distributor, it had a heavy spring in it, and maybe you damaged the original spring getting it off, and so you don't have a light spring anymore. What do? If your advanced mechanism is advancing too fast, you can take these weights, weigh them on a gram scale, and remove 1 gram from each weight. 1 gram at a time. Okay? Once you remove 1 gram from each weight, put it back in, take it out, and check your timing. And I'll show you in my next video how to check the timing. You can fine-tune the curve by fine-tuning these weights, and that will give you the exact curve that you want for your application every time. It is completely doable. I do this pretty often, and I enjoy this kind of work. So I hope by sharing some of these details, it helps you understand how this process works. Now, we've done all this. Let me show you how quickly this distributor goes back together. So we have our springs on, we're all loaded up, and now we just need to put our advanced mechanism plate on. So our advanced mechanism plate just sits down over the top. We want to make sure that we line up our screw holes. To our distributor housing. So you have screw hole, and a screw hole. Now, the key here is you only want to put one screw in, the back screw. And there's a reason for that. So we're going to put this screw in first. I'm going to turn this around. And then we're going to insert our electrical connection, because remember, this is held down by the second screw, and the second screw can now be installed. If you just put the screws in straight away, your electrical connection won't fit properly and it'll want to flop around. So you go ahead and put this in. All right. Now at this point, you can either put the reluctor on or you can put the vacuum advance on. I like to put the reluctor on at this point. Easiest way to do this is to hold the distributor so that the groove for the roll pin is at the top. Line up the groove in the reluctor. And sometimes your magnet will try and center to the reluctor. So what you'll need to do is line the shaft up so that the groove is lined up based on the reluctor being in line with your magnetic pickup. Okay, and let me point to the alignment here. You've got your alignment on your reluctor and you've got your alignment for your roll pin. So take your roll pin, put it in the groove, just like so. And then you're going to need a small drift, something that can push the roll pin down into, and this roll pin's been in and out a few times, so it slides in a little bit. All right, but it goes in there about halfway and it stops. Now at that point, I'm going to have to do this a little bit further away from the camera. At that point, you just hold that drift and you drive the roll pin down until it's flush. That's it. Just until it's flush. You don't want to go past that, because if you do, it'll wear on the plate underneath and create friction. So now we can install our vacuum advance. And this is important. Even if you're not going to use the vacuum advance, which I recommend using it, but even if you're not going to use it, you need the vacuum advance mechanism, or at least part of it, on the distributor, because this screw is what aligns the distributor cap to the distributor. Without this screw in place, you're not getting your distributor cap to stay still, and you're going to be at the mercy of the distributor cap walking around on these clips, and it will slide as much as 8 to 10 degrees, and your timing will be erratic, and it'll make your car run funny. So we'll go ahead and put the second screw in the tag in. And I know my hand's kind of covering this up, but to hold the screwdriver in place, that's how I do it. So there we've got our distributor is almost completely reassembled. Our advance mechanism, we have to push this down, okay? And the very last step, and you can cheat to do this a little bit. You can take these wires and you can just kind of push them up over the reluctor to get a little bit extra space. Okay, so sometimes the magnetism of the reluctor and the magnetic pickup and your screwdriver all kind of work against you. So you put a tiny bit of grease on the arm. Once you drag this over and you get it stuck on that grease, you can rotate it around, and you can see that this is a very tiny amount of grease. Rotate it around, and then once you're in position, lose the clip. Now you'll source another clip. Get all this nonsense out of the way. Get the clip in there and push the clip into place. All right, that's it. Your distributor is assembled. Now make sure you get your wiring off your reluctor and out of the way so that it doesn't get destroyed as soon as the distributor is turning. And with that, you now have everything working as it should. Okay, so on a Duraspark distributor, I want to show you a trick. And this is a good trick. This is something that you're going to want to know because it's going to help install it. Okay, find your alignment tooth. Find the matching alignment tooth on the cap. Put the cap together. Snap it together like this off the distributor. Okay, so I'm going to show you a final trick that you want to know. Find number 1 on your distributor cap. Locate that terminal. Flip your cap over. And now we know that number 1 is right here. Take your paint pen or a Sharpie and just gently, lightly touch it to the inside of the cap. Doesn't have to be much. Take the top cap off and look inside. That little tiny white mark I made, right? Okay, we're gonna make a corresponding white mark right there. Now, what does that mark mean? That means that's number 1. And that's important because now you can put the adapter onto the distributor, snap it in place, and when you go to align your distributor, when you go to install it, you now know where to point your rotor. If you center up on that, you're going to be right at 0 degrees. So you put this in with the crankshaft at 0 degrees, top dead center, and you line this up, and now you're at 0 degrees. Turn your crankshaft backwards, and you're going to want to go 10 degrees. It's going to turn the rotor just like this. Okay, loosen up your distributor and turn the distributor, lock it down, bring your crankshaft back to 0, and you're going to be just slightly off, just like that. Okay? You just set your timing, and you haven't even started the engine yet. When you go to start the engine, now at least you're starting with 10 degrees, or you can go 15 degrees if you'd like. But that is a trick that I have used for more than 25 years. Every time I show it to somebody, they're amazed. And It makes it so easy to get the timing right when you're starting up an engine for the first time, when you're starting an engine with a fresh distributor install, that it's just one of those tricks that really makes things go a whole lot easier. Now, when you put your cap on, we're going to put number 1, and the cap's going to slide right into place, right there. So now there's number 1. If we slide the cap off, our cap and our rotor are already lined up. And we're ready to go. That's how to recurve the distributor on a Ford V8. The process is exactly the same once you get into the advanced mechanism for Duraspark and point distributors, and it's very straightforward. I hope that this all makes sense, and that you can utilize this information for your own project. Oh, one last thing. I told you guys I'd show you how to adjust these. Pay attention to this hole, this big hole right here. Watch what happens when the distributor turns by. You see that arm? You can stick a screwdriver in this hole, and you can pull back on the distributor or on your screwdriver to increase the tension or decrease the tension on that spring arm just a little bit if you have timing bouncing around at idle because your springs are too loose. So just keep that in mind, that you'll be able to see that arm pop up in that hole. And there is a corresponding hole in the Duraspark distributor, and it's right here at the top, and there's your arm. So there you have it. That's basically everything you need to know about curving Ford distributors. I'm going to do another video that'll follow up on this that shows the process of how to do the actual curve, and I'll post that here shortly. All right, so I hope that this process helps inspire you to consider using a distributor you already have. These Ford distributors, a lot of people think they're hard to work on, and the truth is they're not. They're actually really simple. You know, the advanced mechanism might not be right underneath the distributor rotor, but let's be honest, it's not that much more complicated. You can change the springs to adjust the curve on a points type distributor or a Duraspark type distributor in typically about a half an hour. And yeah, that takes a few minutes longer than changing the springs underneath the rotor and changing an advanced bushing. But the difference between having to buy a $400 distributor and buying less than $40 in parts and tools is pretty significant. Even if you don't have an adjustable vacuum advance right now and you want to get an adjustable vacuum advance, you can still pull this project off for about 50 bucks. And you can end up with a very good running stock appearing distributor. If you have any questions about how to curve your distributor, in other words, when the timing should reach peak timing and how many degrees of timing you should have from your mechanical advance mechanism, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments via Instagram, Facebook, or by email. I'm more than happy to help suggest where your combination should approximately be. I have a lot of experience with these distributors. I have a lot of experience with not just small block Fords, but Ford, GM, and Mopar engines. And I can generally give you a rough idea of what your combination should be looking at timing wise if it's a street combination to help give you good operating temperatures, good idle quality, good throttle response, good fuel economy, and good power. That's what we want from our cars. And all of that's available from a stock distributor. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on an aftermarket distributor hoping to get that. If you have a stock distributor with a Pertronics or an Unilite or some other electronic conversion in it, that's fine. If it's not a crazy aggressive build, you can probably still benefit from changing your advanced springs and recurving and dialing in the amount of timing that your engine is running. The original distributors, that little plastic bushing that I showed you in the advanced mechanism, those have a tendency to be missing. You'll end up with way more timing than the engine should have, and getting everything dialed in, the car will run correctly on modern fuel. That's what the advantage of this is. And you can do it for a reasonable sum. Realistically, the advanced kits are under 10 bucks. You can purchase an adjustable vacuum advance for typically about $20 to $25. And if you need the tool to be able to remove the reluctor on a Duraspark distributor, you can buy those for about 15 bucks or less on Amazon. So we're not talking about an expensive process here. We're not talking about any kind of major investment. In the future, I'll do some videos on how to adjust single points, dual points, and then I'm going to do a follow-up video to this on how to set the curve. And that video will be coming in the next couple of days. That video was filmed a while back, but I'll walk you through the process, what I did, how I did it on a car that was having some heating issues and it just didn't perform really well. We were able to improve the drivability, completely change the overheating issues that the car was having, and we're talking about a car that had a stock 50-plus-year-old radiator in it. And we were able to get it to run at an acceptable operating temperature of around 200, 210 degrees. So this stuff is very doable for the average enthusiast, and I want to help kind of inspire you to do that. On that note, if you're not a subscriber, now's a great time to hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notifications. I'm going to have more videos like this. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you think other people can benefit from this video, share it. And if you want to reach me, you have any questions at all, you can leave a comment, hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, or via email. The links are all in the description. With that, I thank you very much for watching. I appreciate every one of you that's viewing my channel. Stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next video.